What's up, everybody? Welcome to Breaking Biotech. My name is Matt, and thanks for joining us today. I am excited to have on the show again CEO of Therapeutics, Mike Weiss. Mike, thanks a lot for coming back on the show.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Likewise, and I'm glad we got to do this. And for those who aren't familiar, Therapeutics is a B-cell focused company, and so far they've really focused on developing therapeutics for non-Hodgkin lymphoma, cancers, and they also have some great data in MS. But I think the exciting thing I wanted to talk to you about, Mike, is really get into more of the details on some of the things we heard in the Q2 report that you guys presented recently. And, check out that. There's a lot of good stuff that the company shared, a lot of updates and things like that. And we're not going to repeat all of that to make it kind of boring, but I think some of the interesting things that came up we could get into more details for. So yeah, thanks again for being on the show, and I look forward to kind of getting into it.
Absolutely.
So the way that I kind of took the Q2 earnings report is that really 2021 for TG is kind of laying the groundwork commercially with the indications that are approved today, so that really as we get into 2022 and we get more approvals, we're really going to be well positioned to really ramp up sales. And the reason for this is the CLL indication hopefully is approved in the earlier part of the year, but there's been such a great opportunity now for your sales team to interact with physicians, to get into those accounts already, that the positioning is going to be great to really execute. Would you say that that's accurate? Would you add anything else to that?
Yeah, it's completely accurate. What I would add is, if you think about the entire organization and what's going on right now, we've always viewed marginal and follicular as kind of a pilot program for CLL and even furthermore for MS. So you started to talk about the sales teams and what I would describe maybe as the field teams that are out there interfacing, but I'll go and I'll get to that in 1 second. But if we go backwards and we just say, look, we have a clinical operations team. They've got to make sure that they're operating at full potential. Make sure that the kinks are all out. Identify any issues. So it's great to be able to do that when you're dealing with something like a marginal zone follicular where the patient flow isn't that tremendous, right? So that's really a nice way to get started. Get the clinical operations team working through the kinks. And then yes, we have the field teams, right? And the field teams, there's a sales team. We have a nursing team. We have two sets of medical liaisons, so MSLs, and we have RMLs and HSMLs. And so getting the kinks out. Who's making the approach? How are they making the approach? When do they hand it off to the second person? And how do they bring in KOLs or top people from the company to make different, whether it's an educational presentation or a promotional presentation. So getting all of that worked through in a pilot way with marginal follicular has been phenomenal. And then again, most importantly is what you described, of course, which is getting in there and actually meeting with doctors and nurses and just making sure that they're aware of the marginal follicular approval. Again, marginal and follicular, if you imagine that there's 80% of these patients are treated in the community, 20% are treated in academic centers, and then there's probably up to 8,000 that are seeking a new treatment every year, but they're going to be divided across a pretty large swath of the country, right? So if you think about, maybe some of these doctors see 2 or 3 a year, right? So patient walks in, it's not like we meet with them and the next day they have a ton of patients sitting there for them to treat. There's not breast cancer, this is not colon cancer. So, I think it's super important to get in there, make the introductions, and that's, again, for us, that's the key for successful CLL. So getting all the kinks out of the systems and making the introductions. And, most of these people know the docs, but it's introducing TG, it's introducing Uconic, it's getting as many of them to try it as possible. Yeah. But again, as much as some people may want to try it, if they don't see a patient in the next 6 months, it's hard for them to try it. So I think we're going to get as many as we can to try it. And I think they're doing a good job in getting out there. But yeah, it was a great year. It is a great year, and it will continue to be. And as you mentioned, the goal is to have CLL approved by the PDUFA date, which is March 25th. Assuming that happens, we have a little over 6 months remaining till we get there, maybe 7 months. So we still have a lot of time to get in front of physicians, explain the UConnic value proposition, and then get out there with the U2 story.
Yeah, that's aligned with how I'm taking everything, and it totally makes sense. And I think investors can sometimes not appreciate all the work that does go into commercially launching something, getting all of these different teams organized, and figuring out how to proceed and how to best target, especially during COVID, which, if anybody's in sales, it's very difficult to get in front of customers, especially, doctors' offices. These places are very restricted, I would say, and they're probably the ones that require a lot more testing and things like that before they can get in front of people. So I think to kind of transition into the interactions that any of the teams have any of the salespeople, they've been able to get in front of doctors, right?
Yeah, no, they're definitely engaging with the clinicians. They're engaging with the nurses. It's certainly not as easy as they've had it maybe in past lives in different companies where in the pre-COVID world.
Yeah.
I think I personally was kind of excited about launching in COVID. I like these Zoom interactions. I'm completely comfortable with it. I could see your face. I could see your body language. We could have a nice conversation. But unfortunately, it appears from what I'm hearing back from the teams is that we came in a little bit on the late end of COVID, where most people were a little bit sick of Zoom, but yet still not prepared for live interactions. There was a window, I'd say, in the April-May timeframe, where we had a really nice grouping of live interactions, and we set up dinner meetings, and we set them up for 20 and 40 people came, and people were really excited to. I don't know if they were excited to hear about UConnic. I hope that's what they were coming for.
Sure.
But they were just excited to get out for sure. So I think that once we get, unfortunately now the Delta variant has come around, and it's definitely putting some stress on the interactions again. But that too shall pass. Fingers crossed it'll be behind us by the time we launch into CLL. And further, I have a high level of confidence it'll be behind us by the time we launch into MS. But in the meantime, the teams are getting engagements with the physicians and the nurses, and they just, it's a grind, right? They just got to grind it out, and that's what's a great part of having a pilot year like this. I mean, expectations should be low. We're low for marginal follicular. Yeah. So we're not behind, in my opinion. We're doing well. We're getting, again, it's a way for us to really get ahead for that CLL launch.
Yeah, definitely. So given that there has been some interactions, I think on the call we heard that there have been refills already, which I think is bodes very well. Is it too early to ask about things like patient feedback, or maybe doctor feedback in the real world, or and I know we're super early, right? But do you have anything to share with something like that?
Yeah, it is a bit early, but I would say getting patient feedback is a bit of a challenge. Just generally, we don't really have direct interactions with the patients. So it is hard to get their direct feedback. Having said that, physician and nurse feedback is possible, and I've engaged and asked the teams to get back to me and find out, try to do some sort of surveying, of the physicians who have used it. Let's get some feedback. Let's understand, are there any issues? Are there concerns? Most people, for the most part, will say nice things. We know from our clinical trials that give or take 80 to 85% of the folks are going to have a good experience. So give or take 15 to 20% are not. We know that by design of what what occurred in the clinical trials. Let's hope that that's holding up, right? That's the expectation, is that the vast majority of folks are going to have a good experience on UConnic. And that's, again, very different than what folks have experienced with prior PI3Ks, where almost half the patients had poor interactions or more. So I think it's important for us to get the actual feedback. Our base assumption is not everyone's going to be happy, but most people will be happy. And I'd like to hear more and hear what people are saying. And people, even in our clinical trials, we were able to get a lot more feedback in the clinical trials. And we also, you hear people, these are great physicians, right? These are people who are used to dealing with poison on
Yeah.
a regular basis. So when they get a drug like this, which is generally well tolerated, that sometimes has X or Y issue, they're usually really well able to manage it as long as they know what to expect.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of them are pretty creative, and they give us ideas on the ways in which they've taken care of the side effects so that they don't have to worry about it. So, and that all filters back into to things we could then potentially add to the label.
Yeah.
But all that feedback is important, positive, negative. But we don't have it yet. Like I said, my expectation is that most people are going to have a good experience, but we need to do some work on that.
Yeah, and that's totally fair, I think. So then, yeah, so the report was 1.5 million in Q2 of sales, and I think, you know, the other thing that we heard from your team is that 35% of the drug was given away for free. And so I think the 1.5 million is kind of a discount to the amount of actual interest there was in taking the drug, but you guys are trying to bridge that gap by giving away some product for free. I don't know if investors totally understood exactly the rationale behind that, and I wondered if maybe you could speak to this. And the reason for this is because you also mentioned that there was really broad payer support. And I think the answer is co-pays, but if you could elaborate a little more on that, that might be helpful.
Yeah, Matt, you're on it. So, but that has been a point of confusion for a lot of folks, and I did hear some people asking about that. So, yeah, so I think we're at like 90% plus in terms of reimbursement coverage. So, coverage is not an issue. The issue is that for patients who are on Medicare, they're responsible essentially for 5% of the total cost of the drug, right? So if they can't afford that 5%, so the 95% is part of what we said was the coverage part, right? So everyone's covered for the 95%. Is the 5% that's not covered. Now, if you're on private pay insurance client or patient, companies are permitted to provide copay support directly to the patient. So in that setting, if you have private insurance, the company can give you basically support that 5%. If you're a Medicare patient, by law, the companies are not allowed to help you with that 5%. So the only way to get coverage for that 5%, if you cannot afford it, is through charitable organizations. And there are charities that are set up to pay those, to support those copays. Now, our understanding is that in follicular and marginal zone, there's not a lot of those charities available for these folks. So in essence, if you can't afford the 5%, our choice is to say, sorry, you cannot have Uconic, or we just give it to you for free. Right. And we've taken the position that if you can't afford it, we're going to give it to you for free. For us, again, the numbers in marginal and follicular, certainly in the early phases, are never going to be enough to make a material impact on our balance sheet and on our net burn, right? So we might as well, one, it's a great thing to be able to do. So I'm very happy to be able to do it on a human basis. But it's also good for business, right? That patient goes on to Uconic, they don't go on to some other drug. The physician gets experience with Uconic. So in a situation where they otherwise might not get to use it again if they come in 3 patients a year and they come in every 4 months, it could be a while before they get that experience. We want them to touch the drug. We want them to interact with patients on the drug and their nursing team. So all around it's a good thing, but it was confusing. So it's really, the coverage is great. Our payer team has done a fantastic job in making sure that we've got the coverage required for Uconic. It's all about copay support, that 5% that folks can't afford. If they can't afford it, we do give it to them for free. And like I said, I think it's good for us. I think it's good for the reputation of TG, so we're happy to provide it. And it's great from, again, let the doctor use the drug, let him experience it.
Yeah, and especially and I hate to harp on this, but like COVID, it's not easy to get in front of doctors. So like when there is an opportunity to move forward with something like this, I think seizing it so that, in the next year or so, this is going to be somebody who's seen Uconic already. It's going to bode very well for future patients that they give. But okay, so that's the disconnect that I think there may have been some confusion. If they can't cover the 5%, and there's no charity available, they're either not going to get the drug or you have to give the drug to them for free. The
Exactly.
100%, right? Okay. All
Yep,
right.
100%. Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
helpful.
And to your point, and since I'll just reiterate the point that 80% of these physicians are the same physicians that will treat CLL patients, and CLL patients will come in to those practices more like once a month versus every 4 months, or maybe even more than that, depending on the practice and the physician. So, yeah, we think it's good all around for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like an absolute no-brainer to do something like that, and yeah, I mean, it's setting up very well for a great future development and ramp up.
Yeah.
And also the one thing I wanted to clarify, and this seems like it's because this patient population happens to be covered by Medicare more so than private insurers, right? But you don't do you expect that to also be true for CLL, or that'll be different?
So both, well, all three, follicular marginal and CLL, are typically diseases of older folks.
Sure.
I don't want to say the elderly, because I think I'm almost at the age in which I'll hit the average age of one of those patients. So I'll
Sure.
just say
Sure.
older folks, not elderly. Um, so, but the difference is that in CLL there appears to be a lot more support in the charities for
Okay.
the co-pays. So there's a lot of, yeah, there's just a lot more. I think it's a bigger disease area. There's a lot more funding available for the copay support. So we don't expect to see a similar level of people who need us to provide the free goods
Gotcha.
versus the copay support that will pay the 5%.
Okay.
And then just to further on that point, for MS, a little bit different story because it's an IV. So typically those are fully covered without copay
Oh,
issues.
nice. All right. That's good to know. I wasn't aware of that. That's pretty cool. Okay, and then yeah, just to touch on the CLL opportunity, since we're kind of talking about it, I think you guys guided this around 8,000 patients in follicular and marginal zone, and then in CLL we're looking at around 30 to 40,000 patients per year that could be seeking a treatment. Is that accurate?
Well, it's accurate that that's our estimates.
Sure, sure.
It, it
That's
is
what I meant.
it is hard to get those numbers exactly, but yeah, that's what we think.
Okay.
There's about 8,000 in the follicular marginal zone. These days, with COVID, with folks delaying coming back in for treatment, it could be lower than that, and it could be lower than in CLL as well. But
Sure.
yeah, we think give or take 8,000 and give or take 30 to 40,000 is probably the right numbers or ballpark to be in for thinking about the total market size of new patients seeking treatments.
Okay. And I just want to make the point that the CLL, the jump to CLL is a lot more than what we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, it's 4 to 5x at a minimum.
Yeah. Okay. So then, just to touch briefly on the guidance that your team provided for the future for 2022, we're hoping for 50 to 75 million in sales, and I assume that's going to be still mostly marginal zone and follicular with some CLL and probably like no MS. I'm just kind of guessing that. And then 2025 expecting 1 billion in sales, split potentially 50-50 MS and oncology. Would you say those are conservative, aggressive target or estimates?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, 2022 is hard to predict, interestingly, right? Because the not hard to predict. I think we're being relatively conservative for 2022. So
Okay.
let's start there. But as you mentioned, MS won't come online until, assuming we get the approval on time, we'll have maybe 2 months of sales.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not going to be a major contributor to the revenues. Marginal and follicular, if we're continuing to give away a third to 40% of all drug,
Right.
We'll see how much that can really contribute.
Yeah.
And then we're relying on CLL, which again we're going to launch in April, essentially, right? Maybe, I mean, really the launch starts about May 1st, right? If we get the approval on time on the 25th of March, It's going to take a few weeks to get into the channel. Everything sort of takes a little bit longer. So we've got 8 months of selling. The first months will be less than the out months. So net, I mean, we're thinking that probably the largest contribution is from CLL, with again some reasonable contribution from marginal follicular, and it's pretty modest. Okay. So again, I think we have ways in which 2022 could be, again, if the CLL launch goes much better than predicted, and we try to be very conservative about that launch, then those numbers are conservative. If there's any delay in approval, that changes everything completely, right? All these are contingent upon we get the approval on March 25th, and then we get the approval on time for MS. For 2025, we're excited about 25. We're seeing, once we get our footing right, we're looking at, again, 2025, just to be clear, is not even close to what we think is peak, right? 2025 is 3 years in. Peak is probably 6 to 8 years or more. I mean, for MS, it could be more for sure, right? Because with MS, you have a tremendous compounding effect. And what I mean by compounding effect is that in year one, if you put 100 patients on, and in year two, you put 100 patients on, you should be treating almost 200 patients in year two. Okay. And in year three, if there's no growth in the number of patients coming on, you're still growing because the patients aren't coming off. There's a long duration of therapy. For MS, a very long duration of therapy. So every year you go out, even if there's zero growth. So what you can imagine is, let's assume that our share of new patients peaks in 26 or 27. It'll be 3 to 5 years until actual peak sales will be achieved. Okay.
Right, because they're on it for so long.
Because they're on it for so long, so you get that compounding through that period, even if the growth of new patient starts. So, our expectation is, look, we get on our way to 2025, we're going to be driving as hard as we can to get as many patients on as we can. But, from an MS side, we are third to market, but we're watching carefully, what's going on with Kesimpta. In their fourth full quarter of sales, they said that they're getting about a 10% new patient capture rate of all patients going on to MS treatments. So let's work those numbers backwards to the best that we can, which is, we think there's about 100,000 patients seeking a new treatment for MS every year. So if they're capturing 10%, and it's the fourth quarter, so they're probably putting on somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 patients in their fourth full quarter of sales, right? Okay. So if they weren't to grow at all from that 10%, the following year they'd put on around 8,000 to 10,000 patients. Yeah, it's pretty good. So, and that's only in, and the expectations they will grow, and the CD20 market is growing, right? Yeah. So, one of the assumptions that we've always had is that CD20s will be about 40% of the market. So this last quarter, Roche reported, I believe, a 36 to 38% share of the market, and Kesimpta reported about a 10% share of the market. So now we're looking at not 40%, but 46% to 48%.
Of all MS treatment, you mean?
Of all MS treatment starts. So it is plausible that we are underestimating how many patients will actually be going on CD20s, because we're kind of capping in our modeling for the moment, and our guidance for 2025 is based on, basically, we're sharing with them. There's 40,000 new patients that start CD20 every year, and it's going to be shared in some proportion between the three drugs. That may not be exactly accurate. And again, the first information we have right now is it's not anymore the way we should be thinking about it. But what goes into our 25 from that standpoint, we think is pretty conservative. It's also conservative in terms of percentage of that 40%, right? So we're not saying we're going to have a third of that on day one, right? Our expectations are for a small percentage in the first year, growing each percentage. per year. And we do think at some point, probably closer to peak, that we're looking at about an equal share of the new patient starts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Roche will continue to have a pretty large advantage because they've got that installed base that's compounding every year.
Yeah.
So we're competing for every new patient start. There's a point in time, 10 years or 12 years from now where, you could start to see, our share of the total CD20 market growing closer to some rational, reasonable proportionate share. But in the early years, and particularly in 2025, if 2025 is what we think could be 10 billion in sales for CD20s, we could still be a small percentage of that because you've got another 3 years of Ocrevus building their base. You got Kesimpta building their base. Our base is really just beginning.
Yeah.
Right. Our base really starts to look like a proper share probably in the 28-29 timeframe. Mm-hmm. The good news is these are biologics, and these are the patents are great, and our expectation is we should have more patents, particularly around manufacturing, that will take us out much further than the composition that currently exists. But even if we were limited to the composition patents and the exclusivity that's provided to biologics, it is still not without challenges to bring biosimilars to market in a reasonable time frame. And anyone who models that this will end on the day the patent expires, like a small molecule, I think is sorely mistaken.
Yeah, that's something that I didn't really think about, but definitely that's something that should be considered when kind of modeling this out, when we're talking, 10 years or so. Very interesting. So yeah, I think in the remarks from the earnings report, MS opportunities like 10 to 15 billion. And yeah, it's when I was listening to the call and I heard somebody bring up the Kesimpta growth. It's interesting that they saw such a big growth kind of quarter over quarter. So in terms of like peak market share, and I know these things are kind of tough, but do you guys have an estimate on how much of that market share of the 10 to 15 billion you hope to achieve at like the peak?
Yeah, again, it's a little bit of a function of the percentage of new patients and time, right, for accumulation. So I don't think we're making any predictions, but again, I think it's at some steady state again, and it does definitely depend on how sticky the patients. I mean, if patients on Ocrevus or CD20s for 10 years, our percentage will be lower. Yeah. If it turns out that it's 3 years instead of 5 or 7 or 8, then the new patient starts will at some point be equivalent to the total market share that you have, right? So if we have 8 years in a row that we take a third of new patient starts, my guess is we'll be pretty close to a third of that 10 to 15, right? Yeah. If the duration on treatment is longer, my guess is that the 10 to 15 will be low, though. The longer that duration of therapy goes, that 10 to 15 could end up being conservative in like the 28-29 timeframe, right? Yeah. But yeah, our hope and expectation is that once we get to a strong and position in the marketplace, that we don't see any reason why we won't be reasonably close to equal share of new patient starts. I mean, I think the product profile supports it. I think everything we're thinking about around it should support it. The only thing, again, all things being equal, they are bigger companies than us, and so if one wants to take some sort of a discount and say we're not going to get fully equal share, it's okay. I mean, if at the end of the day we end up with 20 to 25% of 10 to 15 billion, which may actually end up being higher than that, this could be a great outcome for everybody, for sure. And if we excel and we're able to really get a full equal share of new patient starts for a reasonably long period of time, at some point we should have some sort of closer to equal share of those revenues. But it's a long term. This is long term. There's going to be a lot of revenues to be had along the way, a lot of opportunities for success. And again, even if we're only 20 to 25% of that 10 or 15 or more, I think we're going to have a happy outcome for all our shareholders. Anyone who's potentially thinking about buying today, all of those outcomes are fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. And just to touch on this briefly, I don't believe you guys have given any guidance in terms of ublituximab pricing. Is that right?
So we've given a little bit of guidance,
Okay.
not a ton. I'll give you what we've sort of said to
Okay.
date between CLL and MS. We are anticipating having separate pricing for the two indications. With CLL, all we've said is, there are a number of uh, CD20 and CD20-like approved agents now. So you've got Rituxan
Mm-hmm.
in CLL, and in B-cell malignancies generally you have the two CD20s by Roche. You have Rituxan and obinutuzumab.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, they're priced, I think, 55 to slash
Yeah.
65, 70-ish for 6 months course of therapy.
Okay. I think so. Yeah.
When ofatumumab, which is Kesimpta, was competing in CLL and available, they were priced about 120,000.
Wow.
And there's a new drug approved, a CD19, but same general concept, naked CD20 antibody
Mm-hmm.
by Morphosis, and I believe they're between 170 and 190 per
Okay.
year. So I think we have a lot of price flexibility to
Mm-hmm.
identify where we see the value that ublituximab brings to the table and price it accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
We're not bound to try to compete with Rituxan and obinutuzumab.
Right.
Rituxan, has been historically low, but they've done
Yeah.
quite well. I don't think anyone is unhappy.
Yeah.
Uh,
No.
Obinutuzumab was priced to try to convert as many people from Rituxan to obinutuzumab before Rituxan went into a biosimilar zone. And so I think they had a pricing strategy associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other folks that have come to the market in more of a free market and value-based pricing have been, certainly much, much higher. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a lot of room to figure out the right price for rituximab and CL, but I don't think we're focused on pricing it to compete with price with obinutuzumab and Rituxan. I think we're bringing a different value proposition
Yeah.
to the table. In terms of MS, we've been pretty vocal that we would really like to be able to take price in MS if it matters to payers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's only so much we can do on price. If the payers say, I don't want you to give me a lower price, I only want a discount or a rebate, we can't change the world ourselves. So as much as we'd like to come in with a lower price, and we are certainly out there trying to negotiate deals with lower prices. If not, we'll be looking, at the prices of some of these other agents. I think our expectation is that by the time we launch, Ocrevus will be somewhere between 75 and 80,000 per year.
Mm-hmm.
Kesimpta is, I think, launched at 95,000. I'm sure they're going to be growing that price as well. So again, our hope is to come in at a discount to Ocrevus. The level of discount will be contingent upon whether the payers see value in our bringing a lower priced product to market.
Right.
If they do, we'll get more aggressive on it. If not, I still think we want to come in at a discount, but that will be moderated by what value we get for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. Having to deal with payers is like kind of the elephant in the room, right? To try and manage that as best as possible. One thing that came up on the call was that there's interest in moving forward with a regulatory filing in Europe. And I think you may have mentioned that MS is going to be the first indication. Do you have a timeline on when that might be submitted?
Yeah, I think the team is targeting getting that done maybe by 1Q, maybe 2Q, early 2Q next year.
Okay. And then there's also an interest in CLL potentially, eventually, in Europe?
Yeah, we're definitely interested. I think we want to get, right now, we're feeling the strategy is get settled in with MS, and then get the CLL to come in on top of that.
All right, that's great. And so that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover in terms of the commercial stuff, but I did want to touch on some of the upcoming pipeline catalysts or things that we can look forward to. And the one program that I'm super excited about is the U2 plus Ven program. And I think you guys mentioned that you're starting to enroll for the phase 3. So that's super exciting, but we are going to be expecting some data for the phase 2 probably next year. Could you expand on some of that?
Yeah, so the U2 program plus Ven is super important to us. We're excited about it. We think it's a real important growth strategy. For U2 alone, we talk about 10 to 20% of new starts as U2, which would be really a great outcome for the company. That's somewhere between 10 and 20%. We would hit $1 billion plus in sales for U2. But U2 plus Ven, if that becomes a standard of care in frontline or second line across both the academic and community settings, then that could really enhance the potential for U2. So that program, just to your question, the program has basically 3 parts, right? We had a U2 plus Ven phase 1. We have a U2 plus Ven phase 2, which is called Ultra V, and then Ultra V converted, as you noted, to Ultra V phase 3.
Okay.
The phase 1 enrolled about 40 to 50 patients, of which we've reported on about 25 of those patients with pretty excellent data in our opinion. I think it's some of the best undetectable MRD rates that have ever been reported in CLL. So that data is available, but the anticipation is that we'll update that data during this fall, during the conferences. Okay. So that's step 1. Then the Ultra V phase 2 portion, those patients finished enrollment in the first quarter of this year. So they'll finish their 12 months in the first quarter of next year. And so the hope and goal is that we present that data at either ASCO, EHA, Lugano, or all 3. Ideally, we could do it at all 3. Why not?
Yeah.
And so that's where we are with that. And then, as you mentioned, we're enrolling into the phase 3, and hopefully that will enroll quickly, and we can get that data out as soon as possible. That's gonna be several years though.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Yeah, that is a pretty exciting program, and you guys just have so much going on. So the BTK inhibitor, yeah, you guys recently presented data on that. I think other things that we should be looking forward to, though, the TG1801, the CD19 CD47 bispecific data, maybe the end of this year, maybe early 2022. Same with costabelimab, TG1501. These are different programs, but I'm just we might see some more data on these early next year.
Yeah. So the 1701 we've been updating periodically, and we'll continue to do so. We're pretty excited about that program. The molecule is showing a really nice profile, and we're deliberately designing it to try to take advantage of the profile and really try to dial out as much as possible of any BTK related toxicities. So far it looks quite good, both alone and in combination with U2. We're seeing great reactions to the drug. So we're going to continue to push forward there. With 1801, our CD47, CD19 bispecific, it's by far the most exciting scientifically in the pipeline. So we're working on it. We're still trying to figure out the right dosing for that molecule, and then we're also working on combination dosing right now. Okay. So it's still in the earlier stages. There's a possibility we can get some data out later this year, but more likely, my guess is it's data next year. And similarly, 1501 has been interesting, which is our PD-L1. Yeah. For the most part, PD-L1s outside of a very rare diffuse large B cell and Hodgkin's disease have really been less explored in B cell malignancies. And so we think that there's some really interesting possibilities for combinations across other disease types. But it is interesting. It does not gather the excitement of the community. Yeah. And I think it's a little bit disappointing from that standpoint. I think people should be more excited to give it a try. PD-L1 in solid tumors didn't have much success until you put it in combination. Right. And I think people have sort of pushed aside PD-L1s in liquid tumors because of the lower rates of single agent activity. Having said that, we're grinding through it, and hopefully we'll get enough patients on. We'll start to get people excited. We do have this really exciting idea to put ublituximab with our CD47, CD19 with our PD-L1 as a triple immunotherapy, and we're working toward that. We're going to get there, whether it's later this year into next year. I'd be shocked if by sometime toward the middle of next year we're not testing that triple therapy. So we like having lots of options on the table. We've got lots of ways in which we can combine our drugs. And you don't know for sure which one is going to come up with the best outcome. We've done some safe things to get started. Uconic is straightforward. U2 is relatively straightforward. U2-Ven is straightforward. But we've got some ideas in the background. We'll take a little more risk, and maybe that triple immunotherapy could be quite interesting at some point.
Yeah, and with the safety as it is, it seems like it's an easy path forward to kind of try something in those kinds of combinations to see if it works better than as some kind of mono or dual therapy.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time today, Mike. Is there anything we didn't cover that you wanted to get into before we wrap up?
No, I think we covered everything.
Yeah. Okay.
That's great. Thanks
Awesome.
Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you coming on the show and with being so forthright in your answers. So everybody check out TG Therapeutics. The earnings call, all the information is on their website, so check that out. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. But thanks again, Mike, for joining me, and we'll see everybody next time.